Welcome to What is Going for new thought from the edge of Each week on OMTimes flagship radio show, veteran broadcaster, author, and media consultant Sandie conducts thought-provoking interviews with inspirational authors, artists, musicians, scientists, speakers, and filmmakers who are working at the point where spirituality and science meet consciousness at the very edge of Here is your host, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello, and welcome to the October edition of the Energy and Integration Program, in which internationally respected authors, speakers, and spiritual facilitators Jim Self, Lee Harris, and Suzy Miller offer their insights and interpretations of how the current cosmic energies are likely to be influencing us throughout the coming month. Well, looking ahead, we were going to have Lee Harris in segment 2, but since... Oh, I think Jim is with us now. So, let me continue. Looking ahead, Lee Harris will join us in segment 2 to expand on the key topics of soul contracts, identity shifts, kundalini energy, and rebirth, which are highlighted in his October energy update, followed by Suzy Miller, who will round off the program in segment 3 with an explanation of why we are no longer preparing for our new states of consciousness, but are being called to start living them. But first, here's Jim Self. Hi, Jim. Glad you made it.
Hi, Sandie. Nice to be here with you as always.
I'm having trouble hearing you, Jim.
Oh, no. Let's see. How's that? Is that any better?
A little bit, but still you're fainter than normal.
Okay, how's that? Is that any better?
Just slightly.
We'll see. Now I'm not hearing you all.
There you are.
Either.
There you
Okay.
are. That's much
Okay.
better.
Oh, great. Terrific.
Good. Okay, well, I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad that we can hear you.
Likewise.
So, Jim, tell us, what have you been observing looking forward?
Well, you know, it's a very interesting time, I think. If you recall, when we spoke last, I was talking about these waves of light, because they're the predominant issue that's really kind of occurring. And these waves of light, as they come in, these different cosmic waves, they are interfering with or transitioning your emotional body, your emotional feeling state, the nature of the earth. They're affecting absolutely everything. And back at the time of the summer solstice, they created a kind of an opening. If you remember, we spoke about that. A lot of that baggage that we all have that we don't ever want to really look at, you can't take your baggage with you on this journey. And so it's all being pushed out, but to a great extent, we don't want it to come out. But starting in June, these waves began to loosen up. So if you weren't arguing with yourself so much of the energy that you hold on to was just simply slipping out through the cracks. You weren't even noticing it to a great extent. But in this equinox that we've just had go by, it's actually gotten into even more of a lull. And it's very much like the fall period of time right now in the Northern Hemisphere, where you're having some really wonderful days, and you're just kind of saying, this is great, I think I'm just going to lay back. But to a great extent, these wonderful days are the days to prepare for the winter. And so these energy patterns that I'm particularly watching and the archangelics are talking about is the time to prepare for what's coming. Not that what's coming is fearful or good or bad, but there are some very significant changes that are coming. And this is really very much the time to pay attention to and start to recreate a structure of balance and well-being.
Let me tell you something that I've been encountering these last few weeks, and it seems to be ramping up as if it's, building and building, and that is a deep sense of anxiety in people. Mm-hmm. Plus, something that's become very obvious to me this week is how many people are feeling incredibly lonely, incredibly separate, and displaced somehow. And that's adding to the anxiety that many are feeling.
Oh, absolutely. I think this anxiety, because I've spoken to lots of people over this last month also, and that is very consistent. And the anxiety can't be found. It's not for a reason. It's just something has me off balance. And to a great extent, as I kind of look forward, it's this recreation of the direction that this transformation, moving from that third dimension into a fifth dimensional state, is taking us. And to a great extent, what we will step into is, keep this simple, but very much unlike anything we've experienced before. And so the anxiety, and I feel it in my own space, it's been very perplexing because there is nothing going on that I'm overly anxious or concerned about. But when I sit with it, it's as if this whole shifting of consciousness into a state of well-being, but it's a state that we're very unfamiliar with. As much as we say respect, dignity, appreciation, kindness, gratitude is really where I want to live, happy, that's not familiar to most people. And a lot of the connection that we have had in that third dimensional reality that we've all grown up with, and I can say this real clearly in the Mastering Alchemy body work that I play in, and the people that play in it, is you start to begin to find your space in present time, and you observe, choose an action to engage with, you begin to realize that enormous amount of what we have engaged with in our life is simply noise. And most of what we engage in our life has really very little to do with us and our own particular well-being at any given moment. And so as that starts to fall away, there's a disconnect in how am I supposed to navigate this world I'm stepping into.
There's a very tenuous feeling to everything, as if, everything is kind of wobbling on a precipice, and it wouldn't take much for it all to tip over.
I think that's correct, and I think that tipping over is actually a little more stable right now than it might be in the future. But nonetheless, I'm off balance. And one of the questions that I think Roxanne, my partner, and I just had this conversation a little while ago, what is it that you really want? What makes you happy? And do you put your attention on that and create it? Or is it a wanting that you will get around to someday because I'm too busy paying attention to being lonely or disconnected or not liking my job or whatever it may be? So what is it that you really want, and can you hold your focus on it to step into it to make it happen? Otherwise, there's this kind of just the day slides into the week, slides into the month, and here we are in October, and what happened to June and March?
Yeah, and you say that what people really want. I think people probably had a much clearer idea of what they want a few years back than what they have now, because the more things are crumbling around us, the more change that we are having to deal with, the more distraction that goes on, I think, and the more anxious people feel, is that their wants begin to diminish in a sense. It's almost like, well, I'll settle for this if only I could have a little bit of peace, or if only I could have a little bit of stability. The wants aren't so grand.
No, I don't think the wants are grand anymore. There was a period where there was lots of optimism and there wasn't any doubt that you could create what you wanted in the 90s and the early 2000s. But in this 10-year period that we're in right here, I think a lot of that has been moved out of the ethers, or moved out of the level of awareness. Yeah, I also think, or I'm paying attention to this concept of present time, this concept of balance, neutral, even the concept of becoming masterful about yourself. When that's not paid attention to, there begins to be a wobble. And one of the things that is occurring in the world around us today, in that place where people are not connected to. They've gotten, not being political, but talking about the politics, people have gotten worn down by so
Yes.
many of the concerns and lack of able to make a difference in some of those concerns. And I talk to lots of people, and they don't like what's going on, but they feel relatively helpless or insignificant in making something happen. And partly what happens is when you start to lose that sense of your own balance, own purpose, own point of alignment, and all of these different considerations begin to be thrown around, and concepts like democracy being taken away from you or no longer being a possibility, or the nature of I don't know what's true when I listen to the news or listen to commentary about. That begins to be very disconcerting. And in the same time, though, the ripples of the lies and the distortions and the untruths and the redirections, those ripples go unchallenged in many ways or stopped. They just continue to be ripples in the water, in a manner of speaking. And many times as ripples go unattended, they eventually wind up in places that are unintended consequences that
Yes.
at the beginning of the ripple was never even considered. We have a lot of unintended consequences that are in motion energetically. And I think that's really a source of a lot of the anxiety.
Do you think that the time we're living in, I can see two sides to this. If I stay down here, I won't call it the third dimension, but if I stay down here, I can see and feel and observe what other people are experiencing and be drawn into that. But there's also another perspective, and on the one hand, what I see from this down here perspective is it's a pretty dangerous time. That's what it feels like to me. And there is one of the dangers is that we become so inured to what's going on around us that we withdraw into ourselves instead of going out and doing whatever it is we can, being empowered, using our own sense of empowerment to mitigate things. We just retreat. And to me, that's a big danger. But on the other hand, I can see from another perspective what an opportunity we're being given to really, as you've said so many times, practice discernment and really think about the choices that we want to make.
Yeah, but see, this time is unfolding as it's been unfolding since 2012 without real clarity in terms of what does unfolding mean. What does a wonderful fifth dimensional space look like? In fact, we can imagine it, but we're not there. But one of the things that happens is these ripples. They have been being created for quite a while. They've been created in comments being made, and then nothing said about it or done about it, and then based on nothing being said about it, a little more amped up response to the ripples, and nobody does anything, and so it gets taken up a little longer. We've moved considerably away from our center point that we have had in that third dimensional space, moving into a new space. But right now, the stability in many people's spaces, or the purpose or the passion to create, has been, I think, somewhat muted, like you're saying. The answer to that, in my awareness, is who are you? What are you about? What is it that makes you happy? How is it that you can validate the creations that you just put into motion? Whatever it may be, it's really all about you. I watch in my own space, when I kind of drop into that third dimensional energy, pay attention or get concerned about or allow myself to get distracted, I find when I look at that fifth dimensional space that I have good anchored consciousness in, it begins to be a little blurry. Now, I can bring myself back into it, but the average person, once they lose that focus and get wound up in, isn't it awful, and what does this mean, that space of well-being is tenuous unless it's held. And that's the space where I watch people not fully anchored in or understanding that I can be in certainty and capableness and have a sense of seniority, this is who I am, and on purpose step into an action. That, I don't think that concept is anchored in the spiritual community of the world as yet.
You know, ever since I've known you, you've been talking about the importance of choice, of understanding that we do have choice, and that it is important to exercise that choice. And recently, the conversation, you know, that I've had with you has been, we're running out of time to make those choices. How close do you think we are to the edge?
You know, I don't know that, and I don't know that there's an edge. I think the key to it is, where do you hold your attention point? And when you drop it down into, I'm concerned, my world's falling apart, that attention point is away from you. It's not me, it's not well-being, it's not the capacity to choose you. And when I say choose you, I'm really saying choose others also in well-being versus hanging in there. But when you start to let that off-balanceness begin to be the attention point, you move away from yourself. Third dimension, as we've said many, many times, does not have choice. It has reaction. So when you get into present time in third dimension, it really is, oh my God, this is happening and I don't like this. Reaction. Whereas in that kind of fourth and fifth dimensional space, choice is, I don't like that, this is what I'm going to do about it. This is how I'm going to hold my energy pattern. And it's in that holding your energy pattern that light that you have available to you becomes something that is reflected into others. But we think we're not important to others in that context, which is a misnomer. You are very important. You are big. You are significant. You are important. But it's holding that level of light in well-being that allows the choice to be made.
Jim, I'm afraid that we're out of time. We'll have to pick this one up next month.
Happily.
Thanks for joining us today, Jim.
Blessings.
You're listening to What is Going On's Energy and Integration series. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and we'll be back after this break with energy guide, author, intuitive and channeler Lee Harris.
The future of Internet radio is here. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
More than 24 million Americans have an autoimmune disorder, and that number continues to grow. I'm Sharon Saylor, and I'm one of those 24 million. To put that number in perspective, cancer affects about 9 million and heart disease up to 22 million. That's why I've brought together top experts and those thriving regardless of their diagnosis to bring you the latest, most up-to-date information. Join me, Sharon Saylor, Friday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, for the Autoimmune Hour on Life Interrupted Radio to find out how to live your life uninterrupted.
Hi, this is New Age Grammy winner Paul Avgerinos. Thanks for listening to OMTimes Radio, and please support my peaceful healing music with a purchase at iTunes, Amazon, or wherever you shop for fine music. Just put my name into the search engine, Paul Avgerinos. A, V like Victor, G like George, E-R-I-N-O-S. You can also visit me at roundskymusic.com. Thanks for listening, and I'm wishing you the brightest of blessings.
I am Fidel Nshambo. I was born in a city called the Bukavu in the Congo. We were a loving family, and then, boom, everything that I had disappeared in a single day. People think that when you are a refugee and they resettle you to America, all your problems are done. They don't understand that that's the beginning of everything. I was not born a refugee. I was made one.
It's time we welcome refugee families with open arms. Learn more at embracerefugees.org, brought to you by the Ad Council.
Welcome back to the Energy and Integration Program. And now it's time for Lee Harris to join us. Lee, hello.
Hi, great to be with you, Sandie. Hi.
As always, good to have you on the show. So tell me, Lee, anxiety and loneliness, is this something that you are encountering?
You know, it was interesting. I was listening to you and Jim, and there was definitely some crossover. But I also, as I was listening, I was thinking, oh, I'm obviously a voice for the other side on today's call, which is true, right? Because we're all. It's such a multi-dimensional perspective too, that there are many different aspects. I definitely do meet people who run that. I over the years, I've met many sensitives who I have often had to give them the idea that isolation is not always the best remedy. Sometimes it's exactly what we need, and I too have been that person who, when I was in overload or burnout, I would need to retreat for a long period of time. But there is also this tendency towards isolation that can become a damaging pattern. And one of the messages that has come through me in the last few years is for those people to find what does light you up. Is it creating some kind of conscious gathering, or trying out something that the old you would have thought was too scary? Because it is a very new time, and what I'm seeing, and I'm seeing this happen a lot around, and I think it pertains to some of what you and Jim were saying. We're in this massive transformation where we can't feel the way that we felt many years ago. We might still have the memories of many years ago, but the body, for many people, has not yet caught up with this time. And I think as you guys were discussing, there's so much going on at such a speed, and everything is elevated, that many people have gone into paralysis or shock. And actually, what we have to do is to consistently through our life learn to rebalance, and when the energy outside us changes, we need to change too. But that terrifies most of us. It's the irony, you know, we want change and we're scared of change because our patterns keep us safe, and we have learned to keep ourselves safe through our patterns. So I think because it's a much more volatile time on the planet energetically the last 4 or 5 years than it was before, people aren't quite as gung-ho as they were 8-10 years ago about trying new things. And yet, this is where I think I'm a voice for the other side. I'm meeting lots of people, and myself included, who have gone through a lot of changes in the last year, and not just been on the receiving end of them, but activated them and worked to create new patterns, new learnings, do things that are a little outside the comfort zone. So I think part of it is the discomfort of this time is something that we can either sit down and have onslaughted onto us, or it's something that we can rise to meet and take some directional action. So it's a very tricky time, because ultimately everybody just needs a blanket and a hug. But not everybody's getting a blanket and a hug. And some days when you need a blanket and a hug, you know, listening to someone like me say what I've just said on the radio, you know, you quite understandably would want to say, oh, you know, go and take a jump. I just need to sit here and cry. So you've got to know what you need on a daily basis. And there are days that you might just need to recover from the trauma of whatever you've been going through. But we also have to know that our ultimate aim has to be to get off the floor. And that when we get off the floor and we learn to adjust slightly to these new energies and know that things aren't going to be quite the same they were, but ultimately your soul, your intuition inside still knows how to operate. You're just going to have to learn a few new behaviors and patterns. Then I'm noticing that people are beginning to find their alignment, and a lot of those people are the people who are wanting to create new energy at this time of lots of death energy, basically.
Yeah, well, there's certainly a lot of endings and beginnings happening. I think you mentioned in your energy report about changes in soul contracts. And, I smiled when I read that, because tomorrow, Venus is going retrograde, and it's going to stay retrograde for about 6 weeks. And all the astrologers are pointing to how many relationships, intimate relationships, are going to be shaken up in this period. And it's not as though this is an unusual aspect. I mean, it happens every, 1.5, couple of years or so. However, it seems to be particularly potent right now because there are so many other astrological, aspects that all seem to be crowding in on one another at the same time. And you're talking about changes in soul contracts. We all know that we're all going through internal changes as well as external changes. So it's like a giant shake-up going on.
Yeah. It's interesting. The soul contracts piece was something that came through very strongly for me in the moments before I recorded the energy update. And for me personally, looking retrospectively, because the message in the energy update is that the May to August period, or April to August period, brought with it an enormous amount of soul contract changes. And for listeners to put that slightly more layman's terms, a soul contract can be the purpose for your friendship, or the reason you're or a partner to a certain person, or you went into business. And so the soul purpose might be that the two of you were supposed to create a conscious community in your local area because there wasn't one. But that when that contract was finished after 12 months, you two were either going to have the opportunity to renew, or that was it, you were done. And sometimes those contracts can end very explosively, with a drama or a fight or a misunderstanding or people being hurt. And sometimes they end very peacefully, and people just go, oh, okay, we're gonna go in different directions. We're gonna close down the business, or we're gonna not see each other as friends anymore, or to the same degree. So there's been a lot of that going on, and as with anything on the planet, the consciousness around your experience of that is all going to depend on the two people or more involved in that. So sometimes you might be wanting a really peaceful ending with somebody, but that's not where they're at, and that's not necessarily what's going on for them in their life. So that's not exactly what happens. So this has been going on a lot, but I think one period that we're in now that came up is there are going to be as many opportunities for new contracts at high speed in this August through January period that we're in now. And the paralysis that some people have around starting something new, for example, if you've come through a really bad breakup, usually people are a little bit afraid to get into a relationship again for quite a while. And sometimes there's a natural grieving period, but sometimes people are just holding on to the pain. And I think we're in this very tricky time, because if you look at what's going on right now on the political and world stage, we've had this enormous Me Too movement that is showing up right now in the middle of these hearings that are going on in the US and other focal points around the world. So the energy of victimhood and abuse of power are not only in everyone's view, but they're moving through people's bodies. So I think there is something about feeling your victimhood for as long as you genuinely need to feel it to burn it out of your system, but not letting your victimhood about life isn't working, this isn't going the way I thought it was, that person just betrayed me, trying not to hang on to it, trying not to hang on to or live in for too long the reinforcement of a story of injustice. And that comes to me partly with some of the stuff that you and Jim were talking about earlier, that it's a very fine line right now. And I liked what he said, that he said he and Roxanne were having a conversation about choosing to create. And I had a personal moment when I was listening to that. I realized that next year I decided I wasn't doing many live workshops, and I've done live workshops for 10 years around the world, more than 10 years actually. But it was a very clear message: no, you're going to stay closer to home next year, and that's what you need. And from that you will know what you're going to do with your work. There was a moment in there where I was like, wow, well, that's what I've always done. So there was some hesitation, but I knew for myself, no, I'm going to break a pattern, I'm going to change a pattern, and then something new will come in, and I will be okay with whatever discomfort arises for me while I don't really know what the new is going to be. I'm meeting people who aren't willing to be uncomfortable right now, probably because of how intense things are. But part of the message I guess I'm giving is there's a level of discomfort that is terrifying and is trauma, and there's a level of discomfort that's natural before something new arrives in your life. It's when you can feel the wind has changed. And I think we're in that time collectively, and so there's a lot of people freaking out about what they're seeing changing around them, and our job is to remember that not only are we present in the middle of all of this, but we are also co-creating within all of this and being creators. So I resonated with that piece that Jim brought in there, and that's my interpretation of it.
I think it's an important thing you said there about breaking patterns, because when we go through periods of intense change, and obviously we all resist change because it is the unknown and it is scary. Yes. It's very difficult to hold on to that thought of, but I also get the chance to break some patterns that don't serve me and create some new things.
Absolutely, and I think when you've gone through an emotionally heavy period, it's hard to find that optimism, understandably. You're kind of like, God, I've been on the floor for 4 months, I've got no energy. One thing that I've said to several people this past year is really look at what are you giving your body? So not your consciousness, not your mind, but whether it's giving your body exposure to nice, happy, loving environments versus, going into Walmart or a crowded shopping center on the middle of a Saturday afternoon. What are you putting in your body? Food. What nutrition? What liquids? Are there any supplements you could be taking? What does your body need in terms of exercise? Because I see, and I know this so well myself as well, when we go into a paralysis emotionally or mentally, one of the first things that a lot of soul-led people will sometimes do is leave the body. And so it's important to try and get back into your body if you feel that you've lost that spark or that courage to walk forward. So to anyone listening who that resonates for, it might be something really simple. It might just be taking a herbal supplement like St. John's wort to help you with your feeling of depression. It might be committing to going to a dance class two or three times a week. You won't necessarily want to do it at the time. It's like when you first start exercising again after months of not exercising. You're not exactly running to the gym. There's a part of your body that's like, oh, this is going to be uncomfortable at first. But then when you're 2 or 3 weeks into exercising, your endorphins are going, your mood has changed. So I think because we're having a bit of a parental crisis on the planet, with the leadership the question mark leadership, supposed leadership that we've all got above us, it's like having dangerous, crazy parents. I think there's a lot of frightened child coming out for all of us, at different degrees for different people, but I think, what the frightened child needs is good leadership and good guidance. So if you're not getting that from outside yourself, sometimes you've got to be the grown-up in your own head, even if it's just for 5 minutes a day, and say, I know you don't want to go to the park right now, but just walk to the park for 10 minutes, and then you can come back and sit down in front of the news cycle that is absolutely terrifying you and is not doing you any good whatsoever and is not actually helping your mood. So I think it's that kind of parenting we need inside ourselves at the moment.
Yeah, some structure. One of the things that caught my attention in your energy report, you were talking about kundalini energy. Could you say a few words about that?
It was so interesting. This is a theme that has come up a lot in the last couple of years, and it's something I myself have been affected by, quite strong doses of energy that come online at certain times. So there's a channeled recording that I did this month for my Portal members community, and it's also available at my website. And it was interesting because in the message, the Z's who I channel said, "You're in an era of kundalini." They said it's been growing for many years. And they said the kundalini is the speed of the universe. So often when you see kids jumping around and full of energy together in a group, they say that's a demonstration of kundalini energy when they activate it in each other. So you might notice this in creativity or in sex or in physical activity, this heightening of your life force. And they say that we're in this period of time over the next 10 years where more and more people are getting charged with life force. And it really destroys your old identity, because when your soul is full of life, your human identity starts to no longer be needed, because a human identity keeps everything contained and safe. So it's a really interesting time. And they said that you're in an era of kundalini that's going to be giving people lots of spontaneous awakenings and a rising sense of energy. So I also, when I was listening to you and Jim, I think that's sometimes the anxiety. It's the anxiety that's trying to burst forth as life force or excitement that gets stuck at the position of anxiety. So again, if any of that resonates, I would encourage people listening to ask themselves, what could I do that's going to make me slightly uncomfortable this month, but is going to give me a new opportunity? It's going to be me doing something I wouldn't normally do. Again, you shouldn't be terrified of it, but just a little bit of, this is slightly outside my comfort zone, but I'm going to see how I do when I'm in it. Because when we surrender ourselves to new learning, we do feel very alive, and that's what's needed at this time.
Lee, that's great advice. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Sandie.
It's always a pleasure to have you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Take care.
See you next month, Lee. You're listening to What is Going On's Energy and Integration Show. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and after the break we'll be hearing from visionary speaker, author, telepathic communicator and multidimensional seer, Suzy Miller. So stay tuned.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, OMTimes Radio, IOM FM. Being a radio host on IOM FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
Hi, this is recording artist and composer Yuval Ran, inviting you to a voyage through the chakras, a new double album of guided meditations to transform your life, a sublime musical medicine for nourishing inner peace and reaching to your higher virtues. Get it now at metamindfulnessmusic.com, METTA mindfulnessmusic.com.
Imagine being fired because of who you love. Imagine being denied medical treatment because of who you marry. Imagine being evicted because of who you are. Millions of Americans don't have to imagine this. They have to live it. Because in 31 states, it's legal to discriminate against LGBT people. Get the facts at beyondido.org. Brought to you by the Gill Foundation and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to the Energy and Integration series. Suzy Miller, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Always nice to be here.
Suzy, I know you've been listening to the segments that came before you. What is your take on what we've been discussing tonight?
Well, it's interesting around the anxiety piece. In particular, what I'm noticing is that I think a lot of us are feeling this kind of very strong, but not knowing where it's coming from, kind of anxiety, because I think we're coming to the realization that as much as we like to believe that we know what's coming or that we know what it's like to step into higher orders of consciousness, I think we're beginning to realize that the concepts around that and the actual embodiment of that are two very different things. And as that embodiment seems to almost be happening to us, then there's a level of anxiety that arises that can be really pretty strong. And when you were talking to Lee about, moving into, we're moving into situations where our lives may be changing very drastically. And, that in and of itself will bring up anxiety. But I think that there's this, I think the anxiety is really coming from this awareness of, oh my gosh, this is real. We are literally being transformed biologically, neurologically, psychologically. And it is something that is to the mind or to the lower mind can feel like it is happening to you, right? Because the lower mind, the mind likes to be in control. The mind likes to say, oh, I know what's coming next. I know what's going to happen. And I think that one of the things that I keep going back to over and over again is, emotional processing and information around emotional processing. And what I'm getting to at this point is that, we never really have been taught how to trust a process. We've been taught how to, quote unquote, create a process or control a process or understand a process. But what happens when we are shifting our perspective so dramatically from being things in consciousness, being what we are conscious of, to being consciousness itself? And, as much as we like the idea of evolving and, being these higher states of consciousness, when it actually starts moving through the biology, psychology, and neurology, it's going to trigger all kinds of limiting beliefs, all kinds of limiting, just our fears, our worries, our concerns. And so what I keep telling, the people that I'm facilitating right now is, trust the process. And this is pretty funny, actually, coming from me, because I got to say that, it's like I've had any number of, really amazing experiences in my life, multidimensionally. But none of them really prepares one for this shift out of what we are conscious of and into being consciousness itself. And, there's after a period of time of trusting, there is definitely this exhilaration. There's definitely this kind of rise of life force energy. We were just talking about that this morning on a call that I was doing. And so that definitely comes about as well. But what I'm noticing is the anxiety is first, and then there's not a whole lot I can quote unquote do about this anxiety, but I can trust the process. And there's something about even that shift. It's like we're literally being shifted from doing our humanity to being human beings. We're not human doings, right? And yet we're so conditioned to do, know, whatever. So anxiety, then trust, and then exhilaration seems to be the cycle, anyway, that I'm noticing.
So you're talking about shifting from to being consciousness rather than being conscious of. What does that actually mean? What does that look like? How does that change things?
Well, I'll tell you, I heard one of the best descriptions was actually from a Zen master not too long ago, and he gave this example where he said that, when there's a fire on a movie screen, the screen doesn't burn, right? When there's trauma and drama on the screen of our life, the screen is not affected. The screen is not impacted by that trauma and drama. So we can say that this is like the witness effect coming into being, but I think it's a little bit more than that. I think that what's happening is we're being detached from our dramas and traumas. And as we're being detached, and this is naturally and organically, this is happening because in the much bigger scheme of things, it is simply time for this to happen. And as we become detached from our traumas and dramas, of course the traumas and dramas out in the world are bigger and louder than they've ever been. But what's happening, I think either Jim or Lee said earlier that, when we get to this point where we feel like we can't do anything about that, right? And so, again, what happens when we feel like we can't do something about what's happening in our outer landscape? We learn to go inside. We naturally and organically move inward. And the only thing that we can do from that place is learn to trust the process. And so from my perspective anyway, when we step into more of a perspective of consciousness itself, we're beginning to notice that we are aware of everything. We are conscious of everything. So we're conscious of when we're anxious. We're conscious of when we're happy. We're conscious of when, our president is doing some interesting things or not so interesting things. We're conscious of all of this information. We're conscious of what works for us and what doesn't work for us, even though we may not always act on it in that way. But what is that? What is that is conscious of everything we are doing? It's consciousness itself. And so maybe we are shifting from what we have been conscious of, from putting our attention and focus on what we have been conscious of, to being aware that we are the consciousness that is observing all of that. We are that presence. And when we start hanging out there, then that's where the exhilaration comes. That's where the joy comes. That's where the bliss comes. And, but what I would say to people is trust the process. Trust the dismantling that is going on within you. Trust that the things that are falling away are meant to fall away. The things that are coming to you are meant to be coming to you. The renegotiation of all of these contracts. I love when Lee was saying that, because the renegotiation of all of these contracts has to do with this opportunity to say, okay, something has dissolved, something has completely shifted my perceptual reality. How do I want to engage with you now that my perceptual reality has shifted? And it's only a choice once the shift has been made. And we only get through that shift and into the choice by really learning to trust the process. And that right there is not all that easy, because we weren't taught how to do that.
Well, no. I mean, what I'm hearing you say, what I heard Lee say is, you just got to sit with it. Instead of trying to run away from it or deflect it, you've just got to be with it. That is probably one of the most difficult things of all.
Yeah. It's difficult, but I will say that it's only difficult until it's not. It's only difficult until we kind of say, there's really no way out but through. We can't think our way out of this. We can't even really imagine our way out of this, but we can move with it. We can move with the energy that is moving through us. We can be present to it. We can ask that we have the perception of consciousness itself instead of what we are being conscious of. We can kind of take that step back a little bit. And then what happens, we only have to do that really, in my case, probably 24 times. So we only have to do that a certain number of times until what we're really feeling is the joy or the bliss, the ease that is the same ease that you might, if we're going to personify the screen's pretty easygoing. It's what's happening on the screen that's not always so easygoing, right? And so, again, where's our perception? Where's our attention point? And we're getting the opportunity right now to shift that perception, shift that attention point, and it's going to happen whether we like it or not. So we might as well start kind of just allowing the process, trusting as much as we can, and when we can't trust, like Lee was saying, we have to be really good parents to ourselves and say, you can do this. Everything's fine. Breathe, and then you get this huge influx of energy, this huge influx of life force. And that makes it all worth it. I'll tell you right there. That makes it worth it.
So the anxiety that seems to be palpable to so many, you say that some of that anxiety, if I'm understanding you correctly, is because we are aware on some level, consciously or unconsciously, of this incredible leap that we're about to be taking. And it's that leap that is giving us the anxiety.
Yeah. Based on some of the folks that I've been talking to and my own experience, that's what I would say. It's like because we are consciousness itself, there is a part of us, we already know where we are going. We already know the transformation that is taking place, but that doesn't mean that our biology, psychology, and neurology are necessarily up for the ride, and yet it's happening anyway, that's where we're going. And so it's almost like we know. It's just like, the fact is that, say you're in a relationship and that relationship, breaks up, or you're getting ready to move. If we're really honest with ourselves, we know that some part of us knows that long in advance, right? You know, I mean, they even have, you know, scientific studies that are demonstrating that we know things before we consciously know them, right? It shows up in all kinds of things. So doesn't it make sense that we would know that we are, as a collective humanity, shifting in such a way that we will never be the same? Doesn't it make sense that we are making a fundamental shift in consciousness? And whether we want to call that a leap from the third dimension to the fifth dimension, or from what we're, you know, conscious of to consciousness itself, whatever we want to call that, we're part of it. We couldn't not know that it's happening, because we're part of it. It's, you know, the oneness principle. We literally are already that. Our neurology, biology, and psychology are trying to get on board with what is taking place.
Okay, I can understand all of this intellectually. I'm not sure whether I can truly, fully grasp it. Is there one word that you could give us to help us as we're going through this process?
Trust.
Trust. Okay.
Trust your process. You know everything you need to know for the process.
Okay.
Trust.
All right, we'll give it a go. Certainly I will. Suzy Miller, thanks for joining us today. We'll see you again next month.
Thanks, Sandie.
That's it for tonight's Energy and Integration show. We'll be back in November. I hope the month is filled with ease and grace for all of you. And try not to be too anxious. You're not alone. Thanks for being with us. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. I'll see you next week on What is Going On.